On Sunday, Israel demonstrated its willingness to violate the ceasefire, launching a wave of airstrikes across Gaza. It blamed Hamas for an attack that killed 2 of its soldiers in Rafah in the south of the Strip. Hamas denied responsibility, saying it was unaware of the incident and that the area had been under Israeli control since March. After killing more than 40 Palestinians, Israel said it was returning to the ceasefire.
The ceasefire in Gaza, if you can actually call it that, well, that's falling apart very quickly, and it's probably the only ceasefire where bombs are still being dropped and civilians are still being killed. And as we discussed last week, David, this is probably going ahead in the way that it was intended to go. Since the so-called truce took effect on October the 10th, and Donald Trump declared that the war is over, well, over 100 Palestinians have been killed. Israel continues to launch airstrikes and open fire across Gaza. Palestinians are still being killed and terrorised by Israeli settlers in the West Bank. So this is what the ceasefire looks like for Israel. It's a ceasefire that keeps killing people. It's a ceasefire that keeps up Israel's practice of genocide, and there's no one there to stop this from happening. Now, Australia has agreed to send a Defence Force official to Israel to help oversee a US-led coordination centre in Israel that will contribute to the coordination of aid, security and reconstruction. But if it's led by the United States, well, it's probably going to be a rerun of the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, and that resulted in the deaths of over 3,000 Palestinians while they were trying to access food and aid. And all of this should be led by the international community, not by the United States, and definitely not by Israel. But 2 weeks after the ceasefire supposedly commenced, it's just not looking very good at all.
It's so upsetting that, and of course we knew that this would happen. What has happened is that unarmed civilians have ceased fire. They didn't have any anyway, but I guess the argument is that if they'd had the chance, they'd have been fighting back. But we didn't give them the chance. Now we're in a ceasefire, so they don't have to fight back. But we're going to keep bombing them. It shouldn't be the US leading it shouldn't be Russia leading it should be, I don't know.
Well, that's why we have the United Nations for these sort of things.
There are 152 nations in the United Nations. Now, some of them, of course, can't do it because they're broke. They're essentially failed states. Some have wrecked their reputation, like all the nations that have been steadfastly supporting Israel. Maybe it should be Chinese-led, in that China is a neutral participant in this conflict. Probably Korea, or maybe not India with Modi in charge, and probably no one in the Middle East. But there's a whole range of European countries, Scandinavia or Finland, could do it in a fair way that made sure that the truth got out.
Well, it also depends on how
it's helped.
Well, it also depends on how it's set up, because there was an international peacekeeping force set up in Bosnia, and that was a complete failure. So it just depends on how all of this is set up. But definitely, it shouldn't be US led, and it shouldn't be led by Israel either.
No, those are the two countries you don't want involved. And then you don't want Britain, you don't want Australia, because they're too close to the US. And of course, it would probably be made to be an EU thing, which is problematic because the EU doesn't have an army. It's not part of its thing. So you'd have this mixed bag of countries that are going in to see what they can plunder, and countries that are maybe trying to do the right thing but don't actually have any interest in doing the right thing. So it becomes difficult. A properly functioning world wouldn't have let it get to this, and wouldn't let it get anywhere near. And we capped it probably decades ago.
Oh, that's a very good point. But at the moment, I can't really tell the difference between what's happening in Gaza today and what was happening before this supposed ceasefire commenced. And there is more pressure being placed on the Israeli government to allow foreign journalists to go into Gaza. And sure, this isn't as important as getting food and aid into Gaza, but it does need to be done, I think. And it might end up being a case where foreign mainstream journalists just end up supporting the Israeli talking points anyway, but getting independent media in there would be a good thing to do, I think. And just on that point of the independence of media and mainstream media, a few weeks ago we reported on how the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Chris Hedges had his National Press Club speech cancelled by the club, and he ended up doing his speech that he was going to present to the National Press Club at different venues in Melbourne and Sydney this week. And after listening to his speech, and it's available through Consortium News as well online, and you can easily find it if you do a search for it. But after listening to the speech, you can see why a cowardly and compromised National Press Club would have cancelled his speech. His words weren't polite or convenient. He's provided a direct shaming of the journalists who have spent years just repeating Israel government talking points, and all of these journalists that have ignored the genocide in Gaza over the past 2 years. And Chris Hedges, in his speech, he wasn't talking just about the failure of the media. He exposed the complicity of Western governments in the genocide itself. So I'll accept that it wasn't going to be easy for them to listen to all of this, but it should have been listened to anyway. And also during the week, Chris Hedges also appeared on Late Night Live with David Marr on the ABC, and for some unknown reason, we can probably speculate, and we do know the reasons why, but the conversation quickly turned into a hatchet job. And instead of engaging with the decades of war reporting and moral authority that Chris Hedges does bring to the table, David Marr just tried to pull him apart. And here's a few examples of that Late Night Live presentation.
What evidence did you have that Israel had been invited or would be invited to speak, Israel's ambassador?
That was a source. It wasn't to replace me. I never said that.
No.
But according to a source within the press club, they had reached out.
That's absolutely denied by the press club.
Well, the press club also denied that it was confirmed that I would speak. They also denied that they had posted anything on their website announcing my talk, and both of those were lies because I have the confirmation letter, so we actually have the physical evidence.
The press club denies that.
Well, they were very dishonest. I mean, and I think they kind of shredded their credibility.
But how's your credibility? Because they absolutely deny the Israel ambassador invitation. Absolutely.
What?
So the double tap operation, and 5 of the people killed were journalists. And the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, put out a line that their real target was a camera on top of the building.
They called it a Hamas camera.
That's right, a Hamas camera. And you cite a number of headlines as evidence of betrayal by the big news agencies. You cite Reuters, and you cite the headline, "Initial inquiry says Hamas camera was target of Israel strike that killed journalists." 2 days later, Reuters clearly reported that the supposed Hamas camera was probably a camera of theirs, a Reuters cameraman.
Well,
so they did not accept the IDF line. They questioned it.
Come on, you're a journalist, and so am I, and you know very well that the initial report is the one that carries.
But let's stick to your examples because they are the ones you cite in your argument.
Well, but that's just the point. The initial report was it was a Hamas camera. Then 2 days later, Reuters changed the story.
No, the initial report is IDF says. Now, whether we like it or not as journalists, we have to report the excuses made by outfits like the IDF, don't we? We have to report their explanations. That's our job.
No, our job is to report the truth.
And I'm sure the Zionist lobby in Australia would have been very proud of that effort, but it was one of the worst examples of establishment media attacking someone for daring to hold power to account. And if Chris Hedges had talked about any other issue that he's been involved in El Salvador, in Central America, or in Iraq, or in Bosnia, former Yugoslavia, or any other issue at all about his involvement in the peace movement, I'm pretty sure it would have been a case of, oh, yes, Chris, that's really terrible what's happening in those places. Please do go on and tell us more about it, because we do need to hear more about all of this stuff that you're talking about. But because he was talking about Israel and their absolutely evil actions and genocide in Gaza, and also the complicity of Western governments in all of this, the ABC and David Marr decided that it was best to do a hatchet job on the guy who's trying to do his best to make sure that the truth that we do need to hear about does get out. And they just wanted to silence him and cut him down.
I'm not sure if you could coin a verb to buttrose yourself, to ruin your reputation based on the lies of particular Zionists. I'm thinking you could mar yourself, but that isn't as obvious. The word means the same thing in modern English. And David Marr was a journalist who I had a lot of admiration for. His biography, and more so his editing of his biography of Patrick White, and more so his editing of Patrick White's letters, was brilliant. One of the best publications ever done in Australia, on one of Australia's best writers, the only Australian to win a Nobel Prize for Literature. And it's a bit like Donald Trump. No one has ever been improved by siding with the Zionist argument, and I'm going to narrow it down even a bit further, the Netanyahu government. And at the moment, the Zionist argument is really defending the Netanyahu government. And that's essentially what... Now, I ended up not listening to the whole thing because David Marr's interview was incompetent. I turned it off after the bit where Hedges says something along the lines of, all a lot of these people are doing are just rehashing the press releases from the Israeli government. And David Marr makes the point that isn't it our job to report what the Israeli government is saying? And you could almost see the head move, got you, quodet demonstratum. And Hedges said it is our job to report the truth. Someone get the aloe, he's just been burned. But he's right. And David Marr came from, it seems, a friend of mine pointed this out, university debating societies where it's all about points of order and getting the point, being witty and clever and making sure that you make a semantic point rather than trying to go through the importance of what Hedges has said. And of course, the cowardice of news organizations who have happily seen journalists killed, and not just killed in the fog of battle. That's bad enough. But that is something that is unavoidable in a sense. If you're down at the front line and no matter how safely you put yourself, stray bullet, stray shell, misidentification, but they're targeting journalists. Mike Carlton, who was a correspondent in Vietnam, said, and I can only go on his word, that he never felt, as dangerous as it was, and he lost colleagues, there were many fine journalists killed in Vietnam, but he never felt that the North Vietnamese were targeting journalists, that the journalists who were killed under the normal reasons that you get killed in battle as a journalist. Whereas in Gaza, they've been bombing houses where they know journalists live. They've been bombing offices. They've been kidnapping and taking journalists, and then their bodies have been found, often mutilated, elsewhere, in a clear demonstration of we do not want truth being told. A lot of Palestinian journalists, but also Western journalists and others. We've had aid workers killed. The Australians, which the Australian government should have gone nuts over. Totally. And instead it was, these things happen. Who gets away with bombing aid trucks? And Chris Hedges points this out. Now, there are a lot of things, you pointed this out earlier, there are a lot of things Chris Hedges could have been asked about. Why is he an anarchist? What happened in El Salvador? What happened in Bosnia 20 years ago? Or even just his approach to journalism. You don't have to agree with him, but he speaks with some authority.
Well, he actually speaks with quite a lot of authority.
Yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
a bit of a glutton for punishment because I actually listened to the interview again 3 times. And it's just to...
Made up for me only listening to about half of it.
It's only 20 minutes long, but I just thought, look, did he really say that? And each time I listened to it, okay, I've got too much spare time on my hands, but each time I listened to it, it ended up being exponentially worse with each listen. And I think that while this issue of the interview between David Marr and Chris Hedges, well, that's not going to hit the national headlines. We're talking about it at the moment, but it's not going to be front page news or anything like that. But I just think that it reveals a pattern of behaviour of just how far people are prepared to go to protect the state of Israel and to protect institutions like the National Press Club, which by extension in this case is also a case of protecting the Israel lobby in Australia. And I think just through that one interview, David Marr has ruined his reputation. As far as I'm concerned, he's ruined it completely, but he was prepared to go through that. And he could have done what Antoinette Lattouf did, stand up to these bullies, call them out, and sure, her career was ruined for a short time, but she kept her credibility. And she's rebuilding her professional career at the moment using other, podcasting mechanisms, but she kept her credibility. And in this field, that's really important, I think. But David Marr chose not to. Credibility gone, and I just don't think that's going to come back anytime soon. And we're seeing this pattern pretty much everywhere. Journalists, politicians, entire governments. If we look at the government of the UK and in Germany, we could also look at Australia. We could also look at the Democrats in the US as well, all destroying their credibility to defend Israel and the actions of Israel and to defend a genocide at any personal cost to them. And we had the Met Police in the UK totally humiliating themselves by arresting pensioners and peace protesters, wasting a whole lot of police resources, arresting people in wheelchairs and putting them in jail over the Palestine Action issue. Keir Starmer even tried to overrule Birmingham police so that those vile Maccabi Tel Aviv hooligans from Israel could attend a football match against Aston Villa in Birmingham, claiming that to ban those Israeli supporters was an act of Semitism. But then a couple of days later, the Tel Aviv police in Israel, they cancelled a football game involving Maccabi supporters in Tel Aviv because of the violence and the hooliganism by these Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters. So Israel doing the same action in Israel that Keir Starmer said was anti-Semitic in the UK. So it just made Keir Starmer and the entire UK Labor government just look totally foolish and totally absurd. And for me, it's a little bit like the Manchurian Candidate being holding up the Queen of Hearts card, and it's just everyone goes into this apoplectic sort of state, and everything is being sacrificed. Credibility, government is being sacrificed, whether it's David Marr at the ABC or Keir Starmer in the UK. People in positions of power, they're happy to be made to look like fools, and they're happy to throw away their credibility. They're happy to throw away their government just for the sake of the state of Israel and protecting Israel from scrutiny. And I just think it's going to take years of psychotherapy for all of these people to try and work out exactly what is going on there. And I know there's all of those issues about money, of power and influence of these people and the desire of the West to use Israel to shore up their control of oil and resources in the region. I probably just answered my own question, but this sort of behaviour and protection, absolutely none of it makes sense. Absolutely none of it.
Yeah, Again, David Marr has done some sterling work in the past, outstanding. Why he'd stand up for bullies, for criminals, and don't give me this both sides nonsense. I've forgotten the name of the journalist, but he said the question that every journalist should be asking themselves when they interview a politician is, why is this lying bastard lying to me? And the other one is, if one side tells you it's raining and the other side tells you it's not raining, it's not your job to report both sides. It's your job to look out the window and see for yourself. And those are two pretty basic tenets of journalism. I'm sure we can find much more properly constituted vocabulary for them both. But put like that, it makes it very clear. Is it raining? Look out the window. Don't just take one or both sides' words for it. Don't both sides things. Is there an environmental problem? Don't bring in Malcolm Roberts for balance. One of the most unbalanced members of parliament we've ever had. Don't just allow one side to have the say, or one section of both sides.
Is there a genocide in Gaza? We speak to Benjamin Netanyahu for his opinions about this.
Yeah. Is Hamas an evil organization? We speak to the leaders of Hamas. I have seen it, but we don't hear from the Palestinian people enough. And I don't mean the representatives of political parties. When was the last time we saw the everyday average Palestinian on Late Night Live? Or on 60 Minutes, or on Four Corners? Or on A Current Affair? I imagine that would be very eye-opening to a lot. They're terrified of the backlash, of course. How dare you ask a person going through something what they're going through? That's anti-Semitic. It's not. These people are Semites too. And yeah, it's just insane. And again, the number of reputations that have been ruined to prop up Bibi Netanyahu, to prop up Donald Trump. Is your reputation, your integrity worth it for these guys? Ask Rudy Giuliani. I wonder what they'd say if we were to ask them. I suspect the answer wouldn't be one that was not tinged with regret.
By chance, his girlfriend came